This is your Thursday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand, excited. The NFL Draft is finally here tonight, round one. And to help you get ready for all 3 days of it, Ben Goessling will join me here in just a little bit, covers the Vikings for the Star Tribune. Kind of runs down his entire 7-round Vikings mock draft. Had a lot of fun talking to Ben. Good discussion there. Some good back and forth on what the Vikings might do, not only in the first round, but the entire draft. Maybe take a kicker, maybe take a quarterback. A lot of good stuff there. So I hope you enjoy that conversation and enjoy the coverage of the draft tonight and beyond. But first, what did I miss? Well, if any team needed a win on Wednesday as badly as the Twins, I'm not sure who it was. They entered the day with the worst record in baseball. That's how dire things had gotten as they fell to 7-15 with that 13 losses in 15 games skid. Break out of it in a big way, at least for one game, with a 10-2 win in Cleveland in the last game of that series. 6 home runs, some really encouraging signs from the offense. From Mitch Garver hits 2 long home runs. A lot of contributors up and down the lineup. Jorge Polanco has a nice game. Just a lot of good signs in that game. Who knows if it's sustainable, but sometimes one game like that can help a team kind of break out of whatever funk was there. But the biggest thing that I want to talk about from that game is the continuation of the play of one man in particular.
AC out there in the flat. The ball's thrown in low. That isn't Snooker's fault.
Now, we don't usually play that little clip from Jerry Burns back in the day so soon in the show, but it is absolutely apt for Byron Buxton this season. It is not his fault how things have gone. Listen to these numbers, you guys. If you haven't looked up his stats so far this season, he had another huge game, by the way, on Wednesday. 5 hits in 5 at-bats, including a home run, 2 doubles. Kind of got the whole Byron Buxton package yesterday. The home run to the opposite field, by the way, which he's doing more of this year. Kind of hit a ground ball through the into middle left field that he turned into a double. Hit a harder double in the 7th inning when he was maybe going 7th or 8th inning maybe, when he was hoping to get a cycle, and a couple other singles. I mean, just beat out a single up the middle is basically a routine ground ball. Like everything that Byron Buxton does well was on display in that win. But even before that game, I mean, he entered the game with almost a 400 batting average, and now it's up to 438, which 5 hits and 5 at-bats will do for you. 438, a 938 slugging percentage, a 1.408 OPS. His win probability added for the season is almost to 1 already. It's a little bit better than Alexander Colomé, who I'll leave alone for a day since he did not pitch. The Twins are only 6-11 in the games he's played somehow, some way, but that's not his fault. I mean, he's had games where he should have been the hero. That game in Oakland about a week ago, at the end of the road trip to end all road trips, when he hit the game, what should have been the game-winning, certainly was the go-ahead home run in extra innings, and then they end up blowing the lead in that game. Hit a game-tying home run earlier this season at Detroit. He's had numerous big hits this season. These are not empty at-bats, not empty swings. So he's doing it in the field, too. I mean, everything you would hope Byron Buxton would be in his career is happening this season through his 17 games this season. Unfortunately, there's been some injuries sprinkled into that, but, if he plays 17 out of every 23 games this season, I think the Twins would take that. That'd be a reasonable pace for Byron Buxton, to play about 120 times this season. That feels like if he got on the field 120 games, got up to around 500 plate appearances, he would be enough of a contributor. You'd like to see him a little bit more than that, but this it's been nicks and scratches, not huge things. So if the Twins can at least keep him on this pace to be on the field at least this much, they're an entirely different team when he's on the field, and he showed that in kind of leading the charge in Wednesday's game. Not a must win, but boy, like I said at the outset, a team that really, really, really could use a win and got it in a big way, thanks to a lot of players, but in particular Byron Buxton on Wednesday.
Enjoy your money your way when you switch to Royal Credit Union. You can pay friends and family for free, deposit checks on the go, and even get alerts about your account sent in real time. Stop in and open your account today or get started at rcu.org/yourway. Insured by NCUA.
Happy to have Ben Goessling on Daily Delivery right now. Ben does a great job covering the Vikings for the Star Tribune. We do the Access Vikings podcast as well. And this is a little bit of a crossover episode, Ben, because we are going to talk NFL draft on this. We've had a lot of NFL draft stuff already on Access Vikings. This is like back in the day when, on Scooby-Doo, where they'd have like the other cartoon characters, or like the Jetsons and the Flintstones. Yeah. It's one of those kind of things.
The Hanna-Barbera sort of super show.
Yeah, Hanna-Barbera super show of daily delivery podcasts right here. But I wanted to, I've talked draft a fair amount in the last few days, but you did your kind of 7-round Vikings mock draft. And this is an inexact science, of course. It's not even really a science. It's a lot of guesswork, but I feel like when you do something like this for the Vikings, it gives you some clarity on what their needs are, how the draft could evolve, kind of how maybe they view the board. So let's start, and it gives you an all 7 rounds too. We tend to lock in on the first round, but this is an important draft for them depth-wise too. So maybe big picture at the jump here. As you looked at this draft and evaluated it, what do you think are their biggest needs, and how do you imagine them addressing those needs?
Well, the big question, I think, is going to be, they have the big needs are on both lines of scrimmage, on the offensive side and the defensive side. And you're dealing with a draft that is deep for offensive linemen, has a fairly good complement of pass rushers, and doesn't offer a lot in terms of defensive tackles. Now, that's probably part of the reason that they addressed that in free agency, and they could go address that again, I think, in this draft to add some depth. But the big needs, as I see it, are pass rushers and offensive linemen, and with some other things kind of alongside of there. But those are the two that I really focus on the most in the early parts of this. And I think those are the ones they're focusing on the most. And you try to do as much reporting with this as you can. And that was my sense, is that offensive and defensive lines are very much their focus and the areas that they see as the biggest needs. So, a lot of it up top is trying to figure out, do they need to take an offensive lineman right away? Can they wait? And in this case, it's a draft that has a lot of depth. But I also feel like, from what I've heard, they very much are interested in those tackles in the first round. Christian Darrisaw is who I mocked for the Vikings to take at number 14. Played with a lot of scenarios where they would actually trade down from that pick. And I think there's possible ways that they could do that Thursday night. Elijah Vera Tucker from USC is the other name that has been linked to them a lot. It's the other name I played with. But in some ways, if Darrisaw is there, and I've heard they like him a lot, I think you just make the pick at 14 and then worry about making some trades later, which I had them doing. And the benefit there is that they have 2 third-round picks. They have all those fourth-rounders. So they have some ways to move back into the second round, even if they don't trade back in the first.
How much, I'm glad you mentioned that, the scenarios in the third and fourth round. How much is this draft, complicated is maybe the wrong word, influenced by the fact they don't have a second round pick right now? And how eager do you think they are to, whether it's a trade back, from the first round where you maybe pick up a later first round pick and a second round pick somewhere in there, or whether it's the move up from the third round with using some of that other capital? How interested do you think they are in getting into the second round and having, another top 60 pick?
I think they're fairly interested in it, because this is a team that has some fairly big needs and needs immediate contributions, because they don't have the money to go out and get a lot of guys on the market. We saw them, of course, get Dalvin Tomlinson and Patrick Peterson, but beyond that, they weren't able to address their offensive line in free agency, and they still have a need for a pass rusher. So you have a lot of spots where you're hoping for an immediate contributor. It is easier to get those toward the top of the draft. So, yeah, I think the idea that they're going to go pick at number 14 and then not pick again until the middle of the third round and kind of let 60 picks go off the board before they get back in there, I would be surprised if they did that. I think they have the pieces to move back into the second round. They may acquire it by moving back in the first round, but they also, even if they stay at 14, I think they have enough to make a trade to jump up if there's somebody falling that they like.
And maybe it's not an or situation. It could be an and situation. I mean, I keep thinking about it that way, but they could move back in the first round and then use third round picks to move up too. They could, conceivably wind up with 2 first round pick or 2 second round picks. But the mock you had them trading their number 90 pick, which is, late third round, and their and the 134th pick, which would be fourth round, somewhere in there, to move up to the back half of the second round. That doesn't sound like a lot to give up. But that's kind of how the value chart plays out.
Yeah, it is. And it's one of those things where I think because they have all those picks, I mean, Spielman has been very good at figuring out where to find value to move around the draft board, whether it's been being able to move back in the first, like we saw them do last year with Jeff Gladney. He's had a good sense, I think, of what teams are going to do and where he can move. Now, sometimes when he moves, he doesn't always get the pick right. But I think that feel for how I manipulate the draft board is something he's done fairly well. So, yeah, I think the fact that they have as many of those third and fourth rounders as they do, especially in a draft where you have teams, I think I had been trading with Indianapolis, who doesn't have a lot of picks. So when you have this extra kind of glut of picks in the middle rounds, if you have a team that says, hey, we just need to get some players in here that can come in and contribute, they don't have to be top end of the draft, but we want solid contributors to come into our building. You may be able to use some of those resources to entice a team like that and make a move to go get somebody in the second round that can contribute pretty quickly.
I don't want to gloss over the first round too quickly. I mean, you had, like you said, Christian Darrisaw being their potential pick at 14 if he's there. It's just the simple, they're there at 14. They take their tackle, they plug him in and play him, and that's that. You also had Jalen Phillips, defensive end, Elijah Vera Tucker, tackle from USC. He's got some flexibility to him too, doesn't he? Does he kind of a combo tackle guard potentially?
Yeah.
Kind of like Ezra Cleveland, and Ezra Cleveland maybe gives them that flexibility to either do, tackle or guard, depending on what they want to do.
Yeah, both of those players, I think. I mean, there's a lot of people that like Vera Tucker more as a guard in the NFL, and they certainly have a need there. When Dakota Dozier is back, and there's a possibility that you come out of this thing with him in line to start again, you have a need. So Vera Tucker, I think, could come in and play guard. Cleveland could stay at guard. The reason I like Darrisaw, and the reason I've heard that they like Darrisaw, is it does give you a guy that you say he's a tackle. You can leave Ezra Cleveland where he is. I mean, people talk about moving Ezra Cleveland, but Ezra Cleveland did not play a snap at tackle last year. Even in that last game when Riley Reif was out because of COVID, Cleveland stayed where he was. And they talked about possibly moving Cleveland to tackle if they would have cut Reif at the end of training camp, and that probably would have been what they had to do. But the fact that they brought him along as slowly as they did and that they left him at guard makes me think, do they see him as a guard? Do they not love the possibility with him at tackle? I'm not sold yet on the idea that you could just put him at tackle and it's fine. I think if they felt that good about it, we would have seen them probably hint at that a little more than they did last year. So I think the benefit of Vera Tucker is that, yes, he can be a good guard in the NFL, but I do think then you have that question of, what do you do at tackle? And I've heard they're very interested in Darrisaw in part because of that he's got the size to play left tackle. He still fits in your zone scheme, but he's a big dude. And if you need somebody that can handle defensive ends out on the side, that you can kind of set him out there and forget about him, which they haven't had in a long time.
No.
That's a nice luxury, especially when you don't have a quarterback that can extend plays terribly naturally.
And you've got with that trade you had them making, you've got them taking Peyton Turner, defensive end from Houston. You got two other possibilities that are both tackles, Samuel Cosme from Texas and Dylan Radins from North Dakota State. If they are able to jump into that second round, two questions on that. I'll get to the first one being the Peyton Turner idea. Is that based on just kind of where he fits on the board, or do you think that they have a particular affinity for him?
I think they're interested. I mean, he certainly fits as a pass rusher of the type that they like. He's long-limbed. I mean, they've talked about wanting their defensive ends to look like power forwards before. And you certainly see that is the way they've gone about it. They have a type at that position. They like the guys that are 6'5", 260 in that range, that are flexible, that have long arms, that can get around the corner, but also put their arm into a tackle. I mean, Daniil Hunter is the prototype. That there's a lot of things for what Daniil Hunter can be a prototype. I mean, the guy just looks like he was built in a lab somewhere, but right. That's what they want at that position. And Turner is very much in that vein. I think he's a guy that could fit in and provide some immediate pass rush. He's got the athletic skill set to do that. I think they they have not had a lot of success in recent years with those guys they've tried to put in that room. They had hit on a number of them for a while, but guys like Jalen Holmes, even Stephen Weatherly has been up and down, but Fadio Denabo, some of those guys have had flashes, but they haven't had anything hit in a terribly meaningful way where that guy comes in and is a starter in a while. So I think taking somebody, this would actually be the highest they've taken a pass rusher under Mike Zimmer / Andre Patterson in terms of a defensive end. If you want to call Anthony Barr a pass rusher, we can discuss that.
Right.
But in terms of a pure pass rusher, they have not taken one higher than the third round. So this would be a bit of a departure, but I think it's a big need. And you saw it last year that they couldn't get to the quarterback. So whether you have Hunter or not, I think that's a fairly major need for them to address fairly early.
Well, and Barr was the very first draft that Zimmer was here for. So even if you count him as a pass rusher, it has been a while. The other question I had relating to the first two rounds, and we'll get into some of the later rounds in depth here in a minute, was everybody you've mocked to them, whether it's the straight up pick or the possibilities in those first two rounds, which included the trade up with those third and fourth round picks for a second rounder. They were all either offensive line or defensive line. How surprised would you be if their first two picks, regardless of where they are, aren't in some order offensive line, defensive line, that they don't get one of each with their first two picks?
I would, it's possible. I mean, they have done it before where, especially if there's an opportunity to add just one more, they could use one. I mean, I could see it if they fell in love with one of those corners. If Patrick Surtain was there and they like to go that route, I could see it. But you look at how they've gone about it the last few years, and they talk a lot about drafting for the best player available. But the dirty little secret there is teams construct their boards in part in view of what they need. And if you look at the picks they've made in recent years, they have largely followed the big needs that they have. It's either been offensive linemen, or they take Justin Jefferson last year after they trade Stephon Diggs. They knew they needed a corner, so they went and took Jeff Gladney. There have been a lot of those picks where it's not just like, hey, we're good at this position, but what the heck, this guy is great value, let's add him. I mean, Mike Hughes would probably be the exception there, I suppose. And even that's in a position where they never feel like they have enough, as we've talked about. So I think they know that the needs are pass rusher and offensive line. I think it's, the corner thing could come up. That would really be the other one. If they fell in love with one of the quarterbacks, I suppose it's possible. It's hard for me to see, given where they are, given the kind of state of their life cycle where they need to win, and given the needs that are fairly glaring, I would be pretty surprised if it doesn't go that way with addressing the two lines of scrimmage, first of all.
Yeah, I would too. I mean, it's fun to think about, weird upsets happening on, day one and day two in particular, but does seem like the smart move, at least, would be the logical move, which would be offensive line and defensive line. Glad you brought up quarterback. The fact that the idea of one of those quarterbacks sliding to 14 seems far-fetched, and even the idea that they would, make a trade up into the second round to grab a quarterback seems pretty far-fetched. But in your mock, you do mention a couple guys, and you mentioned Kyle Trask as a possibility in the fourth round, and then you do mock Davis Mills from Stanford to them in the fourth round. Not a huge limb for the Vikings to potentially go out on, but that would be a bit of a departure.
Yeah,
at least, even spending a middle round pick on a quarterback.
Yeah, it certainly would. They have not done it. I mean, they really have not done it. And we had a fairly spirited discussion about this on Access Vikings last week, because Andrew has pointed that out, that they haven't done it. And I agree. I mean, they took Nate Stanley last year, and it was back to like John David Booty before they had taken a backup quarterback in a draft. They only have taken them under Rick Spielman when they need one, and then they take one high. It has not been this, let's add one for the sake of development. They've done that a couple times with undrafted free agents, certainly, but it has not been a mid-round pick. This would be a departure, but I from what I've heard, they've done a lot of work on quarterbacks. I think they know that they need a reliable number two. Having Stanley and Jake Browning, I don't think is enough to feel like if Kirk Cousins got hurt that you could survive. So I think they have some interest in going a different route there and possibly adding somebody. The fact that Sean Mannion is not back is somewhat significant to me. And I think if you can get somebody that you can develop into a solid backup for Cousins, or even, maybe somebody that down the road can start, I think it's a worthwhile investment. And it just the way that they've gone about it in terms of scouting this draft makes me think they're more open to it than they've been in the past.
A couple more things for Ben Goessling. Really interesting stuff. You've got him taking a kicker, Ben. Sixth round. Was that just to torture fans, or was that like a true, inciting is such an overused word, but is that do you think that that's a real possibility based on, what you know about not only their needs, but their thinking going into this draft, that Evan McPherson, this kicker from Florida, could be their guy next year?
To be honest, that was some of both.
Okay.
That was a little bit of and I think I put a line in there about taking an SEC kicker. What could go wrong?
And Blair Walsh was good for a few years for sure.
Yeah, he made some big kicks that first year. And he was pretty good in 2014, and made a couple game winners in 15, and then
and then it all fell apart. But again, they do need a kicker though. And then it's whether they address that, whether Greg Joseph is their guy, or whether they get a veteran or they draft a rookie, and rookie kickers. Daniel Carlson lasted 2 games last time they drafted a kicker, but I don't know. It seems like they need one, but boy, I'd be surprised if they leave this season up to a rookie kicker.
Yeah, this is the dilemma, right? It's they need one. Greg Joseph, I don't think, has the resume to suggest that he's the guy, but rookie kickers and Mike Zimmer have been a combustible combination, or even young kickers, because Blair Walsh was certainly not a rookie, but guys that can't kind of handle the gauntlet, so to speak, of kicking for Mike Zimmer haven't fared very well here. And
the veterans haven't done a whole lot better.
the guy, as we look back at it, and he's inconsistent enough that you don't know if it would have worked out over the long term here. But the move in the end that you kind of go, what were they doing? Was getting rid of Kai Forbath.
Yeah, 100%. I thought that at the time it was extra points were a little bit iffy with him, and you like to be able to count, and that's a momentum play sometimes, less than it is just the points on the board. But I think that probably bugged them more than because field goals. He was pretty good, and he
would have been the hero against. He would have been the hero.
Yes, if they would have made that defensive stop instead of. He would have been the hero for making that long. It was a pretty long kick too, was it? It was
3, I think.
Yeah, it was a long one. So
it was one of those that I remember when he lined up for it. You're sitting there running through every special teams nightmare in Vikings history, thinking what's going to happen here, and it was it hit it on the screws, no doubt about it. Yep, we're going to win the game, and then the defense, of course, gives up the field goal, and then Stephon Diggs,
Minneapolis Miracle. Yeah.
Yes, but if that doesn't all happen, Forbath is the hero of that game. So that is the one you look back at it a little bit. But they got stars in their eyes about how we can upgrade at this position. McPherson has kicked very well in Florida, and they would say, well, he's kicked in big pressure environments. Yes, but he missed a big one against LSU. So that I could see them doing it, but the question they would have to answer is, can somebody come in and be resilient enough to kick in the NFL for this coach
in this season?
Yes.
In this pressure season.
Yes.
Last thing, I'm not going to go through all 10 picks, but obviously they've got other needs. You could see them taking a linebacker or 2, especially as special teams contributors. You could see them adding, even more depth on the offensive and defensive lines. I don't know if they'll stop at 1 in either case. What, maybe kind of, your summary overview of what to look for in kind of some of those later rounds.
Yeah. So I had them taking another guard, Kendrick Green from Illinois, who I think is another really good fit. I think even if they take a tackle, they could use another guard, and especially one like him that fits in the zone scheme and can get out and move. I think that's an area where they do need to add some depth at least, and possibly a guy that could start. So I would look there. I would look at wide receiver. I think they need a third. Their top 2 are awfully good, and you can argue it's one of the better tandems in the league. But Adam Thielen, and Vikings fans are going to weep at the thought, but he'll be 31 in June and has a big number on his contract going forward. And they've pushed some of that into the future, which would tell you they think he's going to be here. But we're not talking about, another 10 years of Adam Thielen. We may be talking about, in a good scenario, 4 or 5, and maybe he's Larry Fitzgerald and he can play longer than that. But even if he's here, it's useful for them to think about another receiver who can be helpful on third downs, and especially one that can be a factor in the return game, which I have them doing. So I would look there. I think I had them taking a tight end from Boston College. So there, especially if they can find somebody that can block, there could be another need there. And I would always keep an eye on the secondary. I think there's still, whether it's a safety, I have them taking Jalen Johnson from Indiana, or a corner, and I have them taking Tay Gowan from Central Florida in the middle rounds. I think they always feel like we can do some additions here too. So held off on the long snapper mock. I figured let's go a little restraint, but otherwise those would be the areas I'd keep an eye on.
Well, they only have 10 picks right now, but it could be up to 15 by Saturday.
Well, I remember 2 years ago when they got up to 12 and they took the long snapper. They took Austin Cutting with the last one. That was very much the moment. I remember in the media room, everybody was like, "Oh, okay, Rick, it's time to go home.
Time to go home."
Okay, you're dealing back in to get long snappers late in the draft. Time to shut it down. Let's go. Put your feet up and celebrate a draft being over. But taking long snappers at that point, let's walk away from the war room for a minute.
Close down the lab, Mr. Mad Scientist.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
We're gonna get some answers starting Thursday night. Can't wait for that. Be interesting to see what they are able to add. Ben Goessling, good stuff. Read all of his coverage of the draft on Star Tribune, StarTribune.com, and follow us on Access Vikings and on this podcast for the post-draft coverage as well. I talked more about the Vikings and perhaps needing to take a backup quarterback in the middle rounds, a developmental guy that could eventually be a starter on the Ramball blog on Thursday. So check that out, StarTribune.com. Let's end with the cooler today. The Wild. It's kind of a disappointing loss, right, to St. Louis. They seem like they're kind of coasting is maybe the wrong word, but you get a 3-1 lead in the third period at home. You're on a 7-game winning streak, and you're playing a team that's got a lot to play for, right? St. Louis is not anywhere near where Minnesota is in the standings right now, but they're trying to lock up and trying to battle for that fourth and final playoff spot in the West and how the season's gone. So playing a hungry team, but they're up 3-1. The Wild still has something to play for too, of course, because now even though they've clinched a playoff spot and they seem fairly well locked into either the 2 or 3 seed with how well Vegas has played lately and how much clear they are still of any teams in the any teams below them, including St. Louis. They're trying to get home ice for that first round, which means a lot to them. I know they played really well on the road recently, and lost yesterday 4-3 at home. But in general, home has been much better for them, and is in general much better for any team. You want that home ice 100%. So to allow a third period comeback where you only get 3 shots in the period, first off, then you allow St. Louis not only to come back and tie it late, but then give up the game-winning goal with 23 seconds left. Can't even get it to overtime. Get that extra point where at least you go in and you're like, well, that was disappointing even if you lose in overtime, but you're inching up in the standings, which, Colorado's lost 3 in a row. They could have pulled even or ahead of Colorado depending on how that outcome went yesterday. So instead of that, there's still a point back of Colorado in that race for second place. Vegas is 6 points now clear of Colorado. Colorado still has 1 fewer game play. But, like I said, Colorado's lost 3 in a row now. They're suddenly, hitting a little bit of a tough patch while Vegas has won 10 in a row. So that, it's one of those things where it's kind of gone back and forth, but it sure looks like it's going to be the Wild and Colorado that end up in that, if it ends how we think it will, it'll be Wild and Colorado right now in that first round. And man, if the Wild could use any edge in that series, it sure would be getting that home ice, because they've had a hard time with Colorado this season, but it's been better at XL Energy Center. That'll do it for today's show. Tomorrow we'll recap the Vikings' first round of the draft. We'll see what they end up doing. Wolves and Warriors tonight. Interesting game on a lot of fronts as well. Thanks for listening to Daily Delivery. Write a review, subscribe, always read Star Tribune and StarTribune.com. We will catch you again on Friday.